In the beautiful kingdom of Ethermore, where golden wheat fields stretched as far as the eye could see and crystal rivers flowed through emerald valleys, lived a 10-year-old prince named Alexander. Unlike other royal children who spent their days in luxury, Prince Alexander had a heart that beat for his people. His bright blue eyes held wisdom beyond his years, and his gentle smile could warm even the coldest hearts. The kingdom of Ethermore had been peaceful for many generations. King Edmund, Alexander's father, was known as a fair and just ruler who listened to his people's concerns. Queen Isabella, his mother, was beloved for her kindness and charity work among the poor. The royal family lived in a magnificent castle that sat on a hill overlooking the main city, but they never forgot about the common folk who lived below. Prince Alexander was different from other princes in neighboring kingdoms. While they learned only sword fighting and royal etiquette, he spent time learning about farming, reading stories to orphaned children, and helping in the castle kitchens. His tutors often found him missing from his lessons, only to discover him in the gardens talking to the gardeners about their families, or in the stables helping care for injured animals. The prince had a special gift that amazed everyone who knew him. He could communicate with people without saying a single word. A simple look from his kind eyes could calm an angry person. A gentle touch on someone's shoulder could bring comfort to those who were sad. His presence alone seemed to bring peace wherever he went. The royal guards of Ethermore were strong and loyal men who had served the kingdom for many years. Captain Marcus, their leader, was a tall man with gray hair who had protected the royal family since before Alexander was born. The guards respected the young prince, not because they had to, but because they genuinely admired his pure heart and caring nature. Every morning, Prince Alexander would walk through the castle grounds, greeting everyone he met with a warm smile. He knew the names of all the servants, from the youngest kitchen maid to the oldest stable master. He would often stop to help carry heavy bags or assist with difficult tasks, never considering such work beneath his royal status. The kingdom had always been a place where rich and poor lived in harmony. The royal family made sure that no one went hungry, and they provided schools and hospitals for all citizens. Markets bustled with activity as merchants from distant lands came to trade their goods. Children played safely in the streets while their parents worked without fear. However, recent changes in the kingdom had begun to worry many people. New laws had been passed that seemed to favor the wealthy nobles over common citizens. Some of the king's advisors had convinced him that stricter rules were needed to maintain order. These advisors came from other kingdoms where princes and princesses never mixed with common people. Prince Alexander noticed these changes with growing concern. He saw how some guards had become more harsh with people who couldn't pay their taxes on time. He witnessed wealthy merchants being treated with special kindness, while poor farmers were turned away from the castle gates when they came seeking help. The young prince tried to talk to his father about these changes, but King Edmund had become busy with meetings and discussions with his new advisors. The king loved his son dearly, but believed that Alexander was too young to understand the complex matters of ruling a kingdom. One particular morning, as autumn leaves painted the landscape in shades of gold and red, Prince Alexander was walking through the castle courtyard when he overheard a conversation between two guards. They were discussing new orders they had received about being stricter with common people who came to the castle seeking help. "The captain says we must turn away anyone who looks poor or dirty," one guard said to another. "The new advisors don't want common folk disturbing the royal family with their problems." Prince Alexander's heart felt heavy as he heard these words. He remembered all the times when poor people had come to the castle, and his parents had always welcomed them with open arms. His grandmother, the late Queen Mother, had taught him that a true royal's duty was to serve their people, not to stand above them. That evening, Prince Alexander stood at his bedroom window, looking down at the city below. He could see the warm lights glowing in humble homes where families gathered for dinner. He thought about the children he knew who lived in those houses, and he wondered if they would still be able to visit the castle to hear his stories or receive help when they needed it. The young prince made a silent promise to himself that night. He would find a way to remind everyone in the kingdom about what truly mattered. He would show them that kindness and compassion were more powerful than harsh rules and strict divisions between rich and poor. As he drifted off to sleep, Prince Alexander didn't know that tomorrow would bring an event that would test his courage and give him the chance to make a difference in a way he had never imagined. The wind whispered through the castle walls, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of all the people who looked up to their young prince for guidance and inspiration. The stage was set for something extraordinary to happen, something that would remind everyone in the kingdom of Ethermore about the true meaning of royal duty and the power of a pure heart. The next morning dawned gray and cloudy, matching the heavy feeling in Prince Alexander's heart. He had barely slept, thinking about the conversation he had overheard between the guards. As he dressed in his royal blue tunic and prepared for the day, he decided he needed to see for himself what was happening at the castle gates. After breakfast, instead of going to his usual lessons, Prince Alexander quietly made his way to the main courtyard. He hid behind a large stone pillar where he could watch the castle entrance without being seen. The morning air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched under the feet of people coming and going through the gates. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. Wealthy merchants in fine clothes were welcomed warmly by the guards. Noble visitors were escorted with great respect to the castle doors. But then Prince Alexander saw something that made his stomach twist with worry. An elderly woman approached the gates, walking slowly with the help of a wooden cane. Her clothes were patched and worn, but clean. She carried a small basket of apples, probably from her own tree. The prince recognized her immediately. It was Grandmother Rose, a kind woman who lived in a cottage at the edge of the kingdom. She had often brought gifts of fruit to the castle, and Queen Isabella had always welcomed her with tea and conversation. As Grandmother Rose reached the gates, 2 guards stepped forward to block her path. Prince Alexander had never seen these particular guards before. They must have been new men hired by the advisors. "Stop right there, old woman," one of the guards said harshly. "What business do you have at the royal castle?" Grandmother Rose smiled sweetly, the same gentle smile she had always worn when visiting the castle. "Good morning, young men. I've brought some apples for Queen Isabella. They're from my apple tree, the one that grows by my cottage. The queen has always enjoyed them, and I thought she might like some for her morning tea." The second guard laughed coldly. "Queen Isabella doesn't have time for peasants and their old apples. Turn around and go back where you came from." Prince Alexander felt his cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment. This was not how people were treated in his kingdom. This was not what his parents had taught him about royal duty. Grandmother Rose looked confused and hurt. "But I've been bringing apples to the castle for 10 years. Queen Isabella always welcomes me. Perhaps if you could just tell her that Rose is here with apples?" "We told you to leave," the first guard said, his voice growing louder. "We have orders not to let common people disturb the royal family. Take your apples and get out of here before we have you arrested for bothering your betters." The old woman's eyes filled with tears, but she tried to maintain her dignity. She clutched her basket of apples tighter and took a small step backward. Prince Alexander could see her hands shaking, whether from age, cold, or hurt feelings. But the guards weren't finished. As Grandmother Rose turned to leave, one of them grabbed her basket roughly. "These apples probably have worms in them anyway. We can't have you bringing diseased fruit near the royal family." The basket fell from the old woman's hands, and the beautiful red apples scattered across the cobblestone courtyard. Some rolled into puddles of mud, others bumped against the stone walls. Grandmother Rose let out a small cry of distress and slowly bent down, trying to gather her ruined fruit with trembling hands. "Look at that," the second guard said with a cruel laugh. She's so clumsy she can't even hold her own basket. Good thing we stopped her before she dropped something inside the castle." Prince Alexander had seen enough. His young heart was pounding with a mixture of anger, sadness, and determination. This was wrong, deeply and completely wrong. Grandmother Rose had never been treated this way in his kingdom. No one had ever been treated this way. The prince started to step out from behind the pillar, ready to march up to the guards and demand they apologize to Grandmother Rose immediately. But then he stopped. He remembered how his father had been too busy to listen to his concerns. He thought about how the new advisors had convinced the king that stricter rules were necessary. If he simply marched up to the guards as a prince and ordered them to change their behavior, they would obey because they had to. But that wouldn't change their hearts. It wouldn't help them understand why their actions were wrong. It wouldn't prevent them from treating other people badly when no royal was watching. Prince Alexander realized that this moment called for something different, something more powerful than royal commands. As he watched Grandmother Rose struggling to collect her apples while the guards continued to mock her, he knew exactly what he had to do. The young prince took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. He stepped out from behind the pillar, but instead of walking up to the guards with royal authority, he did something that no one expected. More people had gathered in the courtyard now. Other guards had stopped their duties to watch the scene. Servants peeked out from doorways. Even some of the castle visitors had turned to see what was happening. Everyone was about to witness something that they would remember for the rest of their lives. Prince Alexander walked slowly across the courtyard, his footsteps echoing on the cobblestones. But he didn't walk toward the guards who were still laughing and making cruel comments. Instead, he walked directly toward Grandmother Rose, who was still kneeling on the hard stones, trying to save her apples. The courtyard gradually fell silent as people recognized the young prince. The cruel laughter of the guards died away as they realized who was approaching. But Prince Alexander paid no attention to anyone except the elderly woman who needed help. Without saying a single word, the prince knelt down on the cold, wet cobblestones beside Grandmother Rose. His royal blue tunic would be stained with mud, but he didn't care. He began gently picking up the scattered apples, handling each one with the same care he would give to precious jewels. The silence in the courtyard was so complete that everyone could hear the gentle sound of Prince Alexander placing apples into Grandmother Rose's basket. The elderly woman looked up at the young prince with surprise and gratitude, tears still glistening in her kind eyes. Prince Alexander didn't speak. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than any words ever could. One by one, he carefully picked up each apple, checking to make sure it wasn't too bruised before placing it gently in the basket. When he found apples that had been damaged by the fall, he set them aside, not wanting Grandmother Rose to feel ashamed of bringing imperfect fruit. The two guards who had been so cruel just moments before stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Their faces had changed from mocking laughter to confusion, then to something that looked like shame. Other guards throughout the courtyard had stopped what they were doing to watch their beloved young prince kneeling in the mud beside a poor elderly woman. Captain Marcus, the head of the royal guard, had heard the commotion and came running to the courtyard. When he saw Prince Alexander on his knees gathering apples, his weathered face showed both surprise and understanding. He had served the royal family long enough to recognize the wisdom in the young prince's actions. Grandmother Rose tried to speak, her voice trembling with emotion. "Your Highness, you shouldn't. Your beautiful clothes. I can manage." But Prince Alexander simply smiled at her, the same warm smile that had always made people feel better. He shook his head gently, indicating that he wanted to help, and continued his work. His small hands moved carefully as he gathered the fruit that meant so much to the old woman. As the prince worked, something magical began to happen. One of the castle servants who had been watching from a doorway stepped forward. Without saying a word, she knelt down beside Prince Alexander and began helping to collect the apples. Then a young stable boy joined them. Soon a merchant who had been visiting the castle put down his own packages and knelt to help as well. The two guards who had caused the trouble watched in amazement as more and more people joined the prince in his silent task. They saw nobles in expensive clothes getting their garments dirty to help an elderly woman they had never met before. They watched as the rigid barriers between rich and poor, high and low, seemed to melt away in the face of simple human kindness. Prince Alexander finished gathering the last of the apples and helped Grandmother Rose to her feet. But his wordless lesson wasn't over yet. He took the basket from her hands and carried it himself, gesturing for her to follow him toward the castle entrance. The crowd of people who had helped gather the apples formed a respectful procession behind the prince and Grandmother Rose. They walked slowly, giving the elderly woman time to keep up, past the guards who stood aside with their heads bowed in shame. Captain Marcus fell into step beside his young prince, and for the first time in many weeks he felt proud of his role as protector of the royal family. This was the kingdom he remembered, the kingdom he had sworn to serve. This was what it meant to be noble, not to stand above others, but to serve them with humility and love. When they reached the castle doors, Prince Alexander finally spoke, but his words were soft and meant only for Grandmother Rose. "Queen Isabella will be so happy to see you. She was just saying yesterday how much she missed your visits." The elderly woman's face lit up with joy, and she patted the prince's hand gently. "You are just like your dear grandmother, the Queen Mother. God rest her soul. She taught you well about what it means to be truly royal." As Prince Alexander escorted Grandmother Rose into the castle to see his mother, the people in the courtyard began to disperse, but they carried with them a new understanding of what their young prince represented. The servants returned to their work with lighter hearts. The visiting nobles left with stories they would tell in their own kingdoms about the remarkable Prince of Ethermore. But the most important change happened in the hearts of the two guards who had started the whole incident. They stood alone in the courtyard after everyone else had left, looking at the spot where their prince had knelt in the mud to help a woman they had treated cruelly. "I have never felt so ashamed in my entire life," one guard said quietly to the other. "Nor I," his companion replied. "The prince didn't say a word to us, didn't punish us or order us to apologize. But somehow that makes it worse. He showed us what we should have done instead of telling us what we did wrong." Captain Marcus, who had been waiting nearby, approached the two guards. His face was stern but not unkind. "You both have learned an important lesson today. Prince Alexander could have commanded your obedience, but instead, he chose to teach you about compassion. The question now is what you will do with that lesson." The first guard straightened his shoulders. "Captain, I request permission to personally apologize to the elderly woman and to ask Prince Alexander what I can do to make amends for my behavior." "And I as well," the second guard added. "I never want to cause such pain to an innocent person again." Captain Marcus nodded approvingly. "That's what I hope to hear. But remember, the real test isn't your apology today. It's how you treat the next person who comes to these gates seeking help." Word of Prince Alexander's wordless but powerful action spread throughout the kingdom faster than wildfire. People in distant villages heard about how their young prince had knelt in the mud to help an elderly woman, showing everyone what true nobility meant. The story reached King Edmund and Queen Isabella, who felt both pride in their son and regret that they had allowed the kingdom's values to drift away from what they had always believed in. That very evening, the king dismissed the advisers who had counseled harshness and returned to the policies of kindness and openness that had always made Ethermore a beacon of hope. From that day forward, the guards at the castle gates treated every visitor with the same respect they would show to royalty. They remembered the image of their young prince kneeling beside Grandmother Rose, and they understood that true strength came from lifting others up, not from pushing them down. Prince Alexander never spoke about what he had done that day. He didn't need to. His actions had created a ripple effect of kindness that touched every corner of the kingdom. People began treating each other with more compassion, remembering that they all lived under the same sky and shared the same hopes for their families. Years later, when Prince Alexander became king, his subjects would remember this moment as the day they truly understood what kind of leader he would become. They would tell their children and grandchildren about the wordless but powerful action that changed their kingdom forever, proving that sometimes the most profound truths are spoken not with words, but with love in action. The kingdom of Ethermore flourished under the influence of this lesson in compassion, becoming a place where all people, regardless of their station in life, were treated with dignity and respect. And it all began with a young prince who understood that true royalty meant serving others, especially those who needed help the most.